You're about to watch a discussion I had with political commentator, YouTuber, podcaster Sam Seder. I believe that we had a pretty good conversation. And I want to make a few points before it gets started because I just really can't stand the posturing and the bad faith attacks. I have tremendous respect for Sam for coming on and having a conversation with me. I think there are many things he brought up that I didn't know, and he made excellent points. I pushed back on my feelings and thoughts based on what I knew. I think there are some things I knew that he didn't. I made reference to certain things. So neither of us are perfect, but I know that whenever you do these kind of things, invariably there's going to be people saying like, aha, did you see Sam dunk on Tim? Or did you see Tim dunk on Sam? No. Both of us view the world in a different way based on the news we consume and the articles we've read. And there may be things I don't fully understand. And I think that's fair. And I genuinely tried to have a real conversation with Sam to kind of break down what our feelings are. It may be possible that Sam says some things that are incorrect, and I wasn't able to fact check it. It's also entirely possible I've said some things that are incorrect, and Sam wasn't able to fact check it. In fact, right in the beginning, he does bring up a point about the aggregate polls for impeachment, and I have tremendous respect for his position, why he believes it. And I want to stress this simply because the conversation we had is very important. It's not about me trying to prove him wrong and win a debate. It's about us trying, at least for me, it's about me trying to have a conversation with somebody where I know we have some disagreements. That's about it. I think in the end, I've done conversations with David Pakman, and now I have a conversation with Sam Seder, and I think there are some things I didn't know before, and they helped me understand. David made some excellent points when I had a conversation with him. I think in the end, we'll continue to disagree. We'll go back to viewing the news we view, and in the end, we'll both have a different understanding of what's happening in politics. I wish there was a way to solve that, but the one thing we can do is conversations like this. So now moving into the actual interview, I'll just give a special thank you to Sam for coming on and talking with me and agreeing and all that stuff. I tremendous respect, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity and for you to spend as much time as you did. It's long. It's an hour and 40 minutes, so it really does mean a lot that people are willing to engage with me, even if I am wrong sometimes. So I hope you all provide that same respect and know that the intention of this conversation was legit. We wanted to, talk about these ideas. We probably don't agree, but there you go. Let's play it. This is Sam Seder. Thanks for joining me, and we're going to discuss impeachment. I don't know what you describe my position, except I'm against impeachment, not a big fan of Trump, and definitely will have some criticism coming his way in this regard, but would you want to sort of describe where you're at on impeachment?
I think it's hugely important to hold the president, and frankly, I think there should be other officials in the Trump administration impeached, hold power to account. The Constitution contemplates a president like Donald Trump might come around, and he should be impeached simply for the sake of holding people to account. And then I think there's also big political benefits to it as well. So for both those reasons, I think he should be impeached.
So I'll tell you my general position, and there's a ton of arguments to go through for and against impeachment. Looking at the strategy, so just for my opinion on this, I think the Senate's never going to convict, right? Assuming we get to impeachment on the, we're in the inquiry, assuming the House votes, Trump's impeached, it moves to the Senate. The Senate's not going to convict. Trump's going to walk away from this, but it is going to be incredibly divisive, and it's also very distracting. And in my opinion, I think politically destructive for the Democrats because, once again, they're getting wrapped up in Trump's game, talking about him instead of countering positions. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to sort of, like I say, maybe have the different arguments on both sides of it. I mean, everything you've just said to me is political, and we can hold off on the question of, is it healthy for a democracy to not hold presidents and government officials, for that matter, to account when they are engaged in obvious lawbreaking? Maybe you don't think he has done anything that would warrant impeachment, but we can go right to the politics of it if you want.
No, let's start with the warranting of impeachment.
Right.
You assume he has warranted impeachment. Do you want to explain your position?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of emoluments, I mean, just today, I think there's probably 3 or 4 articles of impeachment that could be leveled just on what has come out today, frankly. The emoluments involving him holding the G7 at the Doral. I think there is literally dozens of instances like this with his hotels where he is profiting. I think in the Mueller report, if you read it, I think quite clearly what he is doing is encouraging interference into the election. And I think that warrants impeachment. I don't think a president should do that. I think everything that we know at this point about Ukraine, the extortion, the illicit withholding of security funds, warrants impeachment. I think there was multiple occasions in the Mueller report where he asked underlings to break the law. Most of those instances, they did not. He also broke campaign finance law. He also perjured himself, I think, in the questions that he wrote for Mueller. The last being what warranted Clinton's impeachment in the context of a deposition. I think also just the general obstruction that we see just in seeking documents from the EPA, documents from USDA, and so on. That obstruction, I think, is warranting impeachment because they're not providing for Congress's oversight of the presidency. So for those things, and I mean, I'm fairly confident that more investigation will turn up more, frankly, but I don't think you need it. I think you could do it today.
So the first thing is, I can't believe Trump would make what is probably the stupidest move in announcing the G7 at Doral. Completely agree. I mean, if you start with him accusing the Bidens of using their name for political gain, and then the scandal involving the Air Force at his UK golf resorts, I have no idea what the man was thinking in having this be announced. He's going to host an event at his own company's property. No matter what the argument is, it was probably, at the very least, the stupidest possible thing someone could have done. So I'll say that. The other challenging part is where we get into all of the different reporting and the news surrounding, what's going on with Ukraine. Did Trump actually break the law? And you start getting into this very difficult position where the Democrats are doing one thing, the Republicans are doing one thing, and both sides accused each other of doing the exact same thing. So for me,
I don't know what you mean by that.
So for instance, right now, a few sources that I've pulled up, we have Adam Schiff is accused now of trying to pressure Volker into claiming that Trump was putting pressure on Ukraine, and Volker denies it. So a partial transcript was released.
Today, Mick Mulvaney, in front of the White House press pool, said that he had done as much.
So Mick Mulvaney said that there were 3 components. The withholding of military aid was one component in getting Ukraine to investigate the origins of the 2016 counterintelligence report. And so this is so here's one of the challenges, right? This goes back to I have a story here from Time Magazine about John Durham, who is with the DOJ. He's considered, according to Time Magazine, a moderate, reasonable person who's going to be investigating the origins of the counterintelligence. And so the statement from Mick Mulvaney was, is it against the law for the president to ask a foreign country we have a treaty with to aid an investigation that's ongoing at the DOJ? And the answer is no. And Mick Mulvaney is quoted as saying,
well, of course not, but he was withholding, they were withholding aid that was already appropriated by Congress, to the extent that you had Republican senators with their hair on fire about this.
So according to the New York Times, Ukraine was not aware that anything was withheld for a month after the fact.
If you shoot...
Well, so it's not quid pro quo.
No. If you shoot at me and I'm not aware that you're shooting at me, you're still guilty of attempted murder, just because the Ukrainians were...
But not extortion.
Well, yeah, not extortion because...
Right. So Trump was not extorting Ukraine.
No, he was extorting Ukraine.
But they had no idea. So this is the problem.
Tim, first off, the story that you're talking about where the Ukrainians said that, they have recanted on that, A. B, the fact of the matter is we're talking about Trump's action. You do not need the victim's state of mind to establish his actions. We know, this is indisputable. We know that money was appropriated. We know that Trump held it up. We know for a fact that Trump told everyone in his cabinet to say that it was an interagency problem when Congress asked what's going on here. We know that it was sufficient enough that Republican senators were running around saying, where is this money? Why isn't it going there? We also know from Mick Mulvaney that he was demanding investigations into a conspiracy theory from 2016 involving some notion that Ukraine had framed Russia in interfering in the election.
I think
we also know from testimony that we heard from Sunderland yesterday that they were talking about Hunter Biden. So we know all this. It doesn't matter.
Hold on. So the conspiracy theory thing, what conspiracy theory is that? Because that's a very loaded term. I want to be careful about what stories we call conspiracies.
The notion that Ukraine set up Russia to make it look like Russia was interfering in the election, when in fact it was Ukraine interfering in the election.
Is that specifically so here's another, we're entering this world of the right and the left are looking at the same story and seeing two completely different things, right? So we have
I understand.
Right. Let me give you a source. You're calling it a conspiracy theory, but I have here from Politico, Ukrainian efforts to, sabotage Trump backfire. This is from the end of 2017. And this is one of the launching off points for this investigation particularly, where Ukraine, according to Politico, Ken Vogel, I believe his name is now, reporter for the New York Times, asserted that Ukraine was seeking to undermine Trump and work with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. So now you have an investigation into what is this? What is the basis for this story? And should there be an investigation, which there is. John Durham is doing an investigation, according to Time.com. So on the right perspective, they're saying Trump is telling them, hey, we need your help investigating this story that is in Time and Politico, not a conspiracy.
Well, if he wants to do that, then why didn't he announce that?
He did. Trump said it several times, though.
No. Why was he holding back the aid when he's not authorized to do that?
I mean, if you want to talk about whether...
why did he lie? Why didn't he go to the Senate, to the Republicans? Why didn't he say to Ron Johnson, we're holding up this aid because we need to get to the bottom of this 2016, hijinks?
I hear you. I agree. I mean,
well, that doesn't make sense to you, does it?
Hold on. No, I agree. Wait. Let me just say this.
Wait a second. The fact is that you can say there are two sides to this argument. Of course there are. But you cannot sit there and look at the sort of basic truth that Donald Trump lied about this. And when someone lies about something, he did.
In what capacity? What capacity? Like, just explain the lie.
He said to everyone in the White House, including Mick Mulvaney and others, that when anybody asks why this is being held up, you tell them it's interagency, some interagency problem.
And you're saying it's not interagency.
It was not, and we know that. We know that.
So what do we know specifically?
We know that Donald Trump said, hold up on the money. And when people ask about it, say that it's an interagency squabble. We know this. We know this to be true.
Okay.
You can go and Google it right now. The same sources you're talking about have reported this in every single outlet that there is. So the question becomes to you, Tim, why would he lie about that if what he was doing was perfectly reasonable?
So you're saying the Ukrainians recanted on not knowing about it being held up?
Tim, answer my question first, and then I will.
Right. So
why would Donald Trump lie about this thing that you're claiming your sources say is perfectly reasonable?
I didn't say it was reasonable. I'm asking whether or not it's related, right? So your assertion in the beginning was that it was extortion, and I'm trying to set the parameters for what would constitute extortion and lead us to impeachment.
Changing the topic.
Listen.
Donald Trump lie about?
There's 1,000,001 reasons why he would lie. I have no idea.
Give me two.
Okay, the carpenter slipped and spilled coffee on the carpet. He was panicking and said, we got to take some money from a budget and move it to clean the carpet. Like the point I'm making with that is we have literally no idea what's going on in the White House. And there's a bunch of other confidential aspects of foreign government and aid we don't know about. So to make the assumption that this was specifically about extorting the Ukrainians when Ukrainians didn't even know is a leap I can't make. So we can say this: Trump should not have withheld aid and lied about it. That's a fact. Okay,
Yes,
we can agree on that.
Now we can ask, why do we think he lied about it? Is it because
we don't? Well, if Ukrainians didn't know about it, what can we say?
Well, no. The Ukrainians don't have to know about it for
it to be extortion. They do. You can't extort someone if they don't know it's happening.
No, that's not true. You can't
to exert pressure on someone, you have to actually make the implied threat.
Tim,
if they didn't know there was a threat, they can't act on it.
First of all, okay, in terms of proving the crime of extortion, what you're saying is patently false. You don't need the victim to have state of mind is not part of the extortion at all. That's not the case. Plus, the fact is that this is not a criminal proceeding. It's an impeachment. It's a political one. So the question is not what Ukraine knew or didn't know. The question is, what did Donald Trump do? Now, we know he lied as to why the money was being held up. We also know that he was asking about Biden, a potential 2020 rival of his, in a political
Let's strike
context.
that, though. That should not be relevant.
Excuse me?
It should not be relevant that someone avoids scrutiny simply because they announce they'll run for president.
No.
It doesn't matter if you're the president or a candidate. You should be investigated if you're subject to scrutiny.
Did you look at the transcripts of
I read the transcript. I did.
The chat logs between Sunderland and Bill Taylor.
That was the one where he said for a political, and then what Sunderland responded saying that's not the case.
No, that's the one where Sunderland said the president wants the deliverables. And that's where Bill Taylor said, as a predicate for what Sunderland said, like I said on the phone last night, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance.
That's what I mean, right.
To withhold
in exchange for politics.
For help within a political campaign.
To which the response was, you must be misunderstood, misunderstanding this. We should take the call.
There was no quid pro quo. Yes, he said that Donald Trump said there was no quid pro quo. Well, what do you think Bill Taylor was referring to? Why do you think Bill Taylor had that impression?
Sometimes people could have an impression. I would call that circumstantial.
Yeah, it was pretty circumstantial.
So right now you have a bunch of people who have gone on the record so far saying Trump didn't want anything from Ukraine. There was no quid pro quo. And the closest we do. We do have them on the record.
No.
Volker just went on the record. And Sunderland did too.
Yeah, Sunderland said, Trump said there was no quid pro quo.
Well, Sunderland said in the story, he said, quote, Trump didn't want anything from Ukraine.
No. If you listen to his testimony today, the testimony he gave today, he changed it. It wasn't the stories that anticipated what he would say was not what he said today. And what he said was that Donald Trump denied it was a quid pro quo. Now, just because Trump denies it's a quid pro quo doesn't mean that it's not a quid pro quo. The facts
doesn't mean it is either.
The facts, that's right, Tim. But the facts is that he withheld aid that was appropriated by Congress. He lied about the reasons why he was doing it. We know that he brought up his 2020 campaign against Joe Biden. There is absolutely he did in the transcript.
He did not mention 2020 in the transcript. He mentioned 2016.
He mentioned Joe Biden.
And Joe Biden was accused by some Ukrainians.
What is Joe Biden accused of what?
So right now we have an MP in Ukraine alleging that for consulting activities, Joe Biden received a payment of $900,000 paid through Rosemont Seneca. Joe Biden specifically was paid $900,000 through Rosemont Seneca for consulting services. And Victor Shokin has issued a sworn affidavit. We actually now have 4 sworn affidavits from Ukrainian government officials saying that Hunter Biden was going to be part of this investigation into Lashenki, the oligarch who ran Burisma, who owned it, and that Joe Biden intervened specifically. According to Victor Shokin's sworn testimony, he said that he was approached by the president and told, you have to drop this. And then when Joe Biden said, we're going to withhold $1 billion in aid to Ukraine unless you fire him,
that every member of NATO and the British who were investigating Burisma were demanding that prosecutor be fired because he was refusing to investigate Burisma. So when Joe Biden went there and said, "You've got to get rid of this prosecutor," it was because the prosecutor was not cooperating with international investigations into Burisma.
So according to 4 sworn affidavits within Ukraine and now a Ukrainian MP, Joe Biden was on the payment end through Rosemont Seneca. You're gonna have to figure out who you think is more trustworthy. Which Ukrainian official in that statement? The Ukrainian official who said he wasn't doing his job, or the one who said he was?
All right. Well, I mean, Tim, let's say that Joe Biden is guilty of everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
Why did Donald Trump lie for a perfectly valid investigation, according to you? Why did he lie? Why did and what authority does he have to withhold that money that has been appropriated by Congress?
That's a different issue, though, right?
No,
I agree with you.
That is the only issue.
Well, no. Listen.
All the other stuff that you're talking about, in my mind, is conspiracy theory. You think it's obviously legit, but I'm talking about.
I can give you all the sources for
the
these.
president
off
has
the top of my
nothing
head.
to do. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, they could be involved in the most crooked stuff in the world. That is not exculpatory for what Donald Trump did.
So let's separate withholding of aid from investigate Joe Biden's alleged corruption.
No, we can't do that because we know these things happen simultaneously. We know this. We know this, Tim.
Okay. So the Ukrainians don't know, and you're saying that doesn't matter.
They
didn't know about the withholding of military aid.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. So
they assumed it was coming.
Did you know that the investigation into Burisma had actually reopened in earlier 2018? I believe it was 2018. It might have been earlier this year, but before they had the conversation, I believe actually it was February this year. They reopened the investigation already.
It's completely irrelevant to what.
So first of all, I'm not saying it's completely legitimate. I'm saying I don't know, and all I know is I see you tell me, hey, Trump did this, and that's proof no matter what. But then you can go and read. So I'll tell you first one of the problems. Conspiracy theory. It's the first thing that people say when they talk about the investigation into the DNC. But we literally have a DOJ investigation and a story from the New York Times and Politico talking exactly about this. If those stories are true, then things start getting more complicated.
Exculpate.
If Donald Trump is trying to seek enforcement of a treaty we have with Ukraine to investigate potential corruption, then you have a harder argument.
If I'm a cop and there's a crime and you're selling drugs, let's say, do I have the right, or I think you're selling drugs, okay? Do I have the right to come into your house without a warrant?
No.
Right. Okay. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the actions of Donald Trump. Now, if you want to say that there's smoke and fire there with these theories that you have about Ukraine, that's all.
Those are not my theories. I'm citing Politico.
What a report from Politico
and the New York Times
and
right.
Whatever it is. That does
I've
not.
got them pulled up right now, actually. Heavy.com, Washington Examiner, USA Today.
Tim, I'm not questioning that.
You just said they were theories of mine.
Okay.
They're not.
Theories that you're reading. Now.
Mainstream news reports.
Okay. Mainstream news reports.
Yeah.
That does not change Donald Trump's actions.
What's the connection between withholding of aid and Ukraine that we can prove in court?
We don't have to prove it in court.
In an impeachment hearing, can we prove it?
We can prove that he withheld it. Yes.
Can we prove it's connected in any way to Ukraine?
Well, first off, we don't need to for it to be impeachable. He had some reason. You say maybe it was because the carpenter.
I don't know what the reason
coffee or something.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
But he didn't have the right to do that.
You're right. But I agree with you. I've said I agree with you several times.
You could impeach him for that.
Yeah.
You could also impeach him because you believe it's a political process. You believe that he has tried to leverage that aid to get an investigation into someone he anticipates running against in 2020. Now, it's a political process.
All right. Well, so I agree with you. Right. If we have, I guess you could call it probable cause, looking at the circumstances, 100%. So then the next step, I suppose, would be to vote on the authorization of impeachment, right?
To vote, well, you would vote on the articles of impeachment.
So why aren't they voting on the authorization of an inquiry into Trump?
What do you mean voting on an authorization? They are authorized. They don't need to do that.
So there's rules specifically to allow the
Those
minority
rules
protections.
don't exist anymore.
Why is that?
They don't. They were changed
Should they?
like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't.
Right.
I think it's irrelevant.
So here's the problem. Okay, right now you have conservatives looking at Adam Schiff, who has made many misstatements going back several years with Russiagate, and now the misstatements about whether he had contact with whistleblower. You had the whistleblower statement was in misalignment, I'll say, with the actual transcript of the call. Now you have reports.
Not an actual transcript. It's not a verbatim.
According to the New York Times, it's as close to a verbatim transcript as is possible to have.
Right. Which means now that it's not a verbatim transcript.
That would imply the intelligence community is fabricating the transcript, or altering it in some capacity.
No, it would just say that it's not a verbatim transcript. That's all.
Right. So when we're, to the best of our abilities, we have to trust the intelligence community did the right job when they were transcribing these calls to the best of their ability. So right now we have Adam Schiff being accused, I guess, by multiple outlets of pressuring Volker to claim there was pressure when there wasn't, and Volker repeatedly saying that's not true, that's not true. We have Adam Schiff's misstatements, and now we have several Republicans being barred access to saying
that. What is Volker saying that Schiff? Volker claims that Schiff was pressuring him to say something.
No, but partial transcripts were released, and there's a few outlets now saying that.
What is Volker saying? Why isn't Volker claiming this?
Volker is claiming that Schiff is trying to conflate issues that didn't occur for political reasons. So the official reportings.
What issues is Volker claiming that Schiff is trying to conflate?
The quote from Schiff was something like, "Do you think it would be wrong for a president to seek foreign aid to interfere in a U.S. election?" To which Volker says, "That I agree, that would be wrong." Schiff then says, "Do you think it would be wrong if a president leveraged aid against a foreign country, or do you think it would be especially wrong if a president leveraged, aid against a foreign government to pressure them into interfering?" And then Volker stops and says, "I think you're trying to conflate things that didn't occur," saying there was no pressure, there was no quid pro quo, and now the story as being reported is Schiff tries to pressure Volker. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying this is the interpretation of it.
He questioned him as a witness in an investigation.
Well, those questions are improper, I would say. Right, absolutely. Okay. So it's you look at what Mike Mulvaney said when he was asked. You saw the comment he said, "When did you stop beating your wife?" Right? It's a loaded question that of course you would agree with. They didn't ask the question, did Donald Trump pressure a foreign government and leverage aid? That's not what he was asked. He asked, is it wrong to do? Well, of course, everyone's going to say yes.
No, Volker I'm not sure that. Trump said that he can do that.
Well,
there are plenty of people who claim that
the issue I'm bringing up is not to talk about Volker or Schiff, but to point out, here's what I see. I see the Democrats having closed-door hearings without a vote on authorization.
They're going to release
that's great, and I think that's wrong. 100% wrong. Trump should not have privacy rights when it comes to these investigations, and neither should the Congress. This should be open to all representatives to figure out what's going on in this country, not a secret hearing in which they promise to give us the information after the fact. I don't trust him. I don't trust Trump. I don't trust Schiff.
Every day.
And our members of Congress should be allowed to sit in on those. And in fact, according to I can't remember the guy's name. He said it's typical that you can sit in on these other hearings. And according to the Associated Press, the only reason they're barring Republicans from these hearings is because they have the authority. It is unusual, but because of the authority, they've put guards in front of the doors. I don't like that. I don't think the Democrats should be separating other members of Congress from what's happening. Now, I'm not going to say Trump should be subject to an investigation, same as anybody else. And members of Congress should have access to information, and vice versa. It's the same both ways. But now you're going to have to convince a Republican why the Democrats have a right to secret hearings, barring their representatives from hearing about it.
Why do I need to convince
you will.
Why?
Because in the Senate, where the Republicans have the majority, they're going to block this and not convict Trump. And then Trump's going to walk away from this, and it's going to make the Democrats look weak and ineffective and throw them off base for 2020, getting into the political argument.
All right, let's get into the political argument.
Yeah.
We know that over 50% now of Americans in polls
according to
Donald Trump. Excuse me?
According to which poll? Right. So there's like 13, and they teeter between
Fox News poll.
Fox News poll
Clear
oversampled Democrats.
Okay. Well, you don't like the polls, but you show me the polls. I mean, it's very.
It's the aggregate is around 43%.
That's not true. Polling on impeachment, Morning Consult, Fox News, which you think is
So here's what I typically do when I use polls. Because of the problems of 2016, because Nate Silver and Rasmussen are fighting online, because Zogby relaunched, you got to check the methodology on these.
So polls don't mean anything. Fine.
A little bit.
Well, all right.
It's admittedly tough.
Whatever you want to say, Tim. The polls are screwy. There's people oversampling in the polls.
So here's the core issue. Right, we're not talking about what I want. We're talking about what's happening in this country. Fox News, for instance, is a bad example because according to the New York Post, 48% of the people in that survey were Democrats when 36% of the country are Democrats, giving an oversampling, which then brings the number down to around 43, which is in line with the aggregate for most other polls.
And you don't think they adjust for that?
They did not adjust for that. They stated as much.
What about the Morning Consult one?
So these are all individual polls. I tend to prefer aggregates, but I'll entertain any individual poll for sure.
Let's look it up. Let's see what the aggregate.
Yeah, do it to it.
Where would you like to go? Would you tell me what is a legit source?
Let's see if does Real Clear Politics have an aggregate on this one?
Oh my God.
So it's the average is 52%.
Okay, so it's actually 2 points higher than I thought it was.
Right. My only concern is.
Okay, wait a second, Tim. Let me go now. All right, because we just did your little thing here where we unskewed the polls and we found that the majority of Americans do want him impeached.
Right.
Now, that means that, and once this information actually gets more widely disseminated, I think the Democrats are going to do public hearings. I think they're going to release all these things. It behooves them to do so. If they don't, I think they're making a mistake because they're going to want more than 52%, even if they can get it. And when it goes to the Senate, if Mitch McConnell holds a vote, I know he said he has, but the people who don't want him to have a vote are Susan Collins and our Cory Gardner and our Sally McMaster. These are people, and Jody Ernst, who are very nervous about having to take a vote because they don't want to vote to protect Donald Trump. In fact, there's a lot of Republicans in the House who I think don't want to vote to protect Donald Trump. And so from a political standpoint, everything we know about 2018 was that negative partisanship drove record numbers of Democrats to vote in an off-year election. Mm-hmm. And negative partisanship is also going to drive them to vote in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
And so the idea that you can nationalize the race in Senate races and in congressional races by having every Democrat running against a Republican say, did you vote to protect Donald Trump, who has, as you know, I think you'll acknowledge, very bad favorability ratings. And
for Trump?
Yes.
According to the New York Times, his favorability is up since the time he was elected.
He is still underwater in favorability ratings.
But higher than when he got elected.
Great. He is still underwater in favorability ratings. So you're going to have the opportunity for every Senate candidate and every House candidate say you voted to protect Donald Trump when 52% of the aggregate polling at this point, and we're only 2 weeks into this.
Wow.
Right? It's gone up significantly, even amongst Republicans. Has it gone up?
Trump's favorability went down by about 4 points on January 4th, but till today, this time is way off. What is this? Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. Continue. RCP gave me the wrong information.
Anyways, so I think there's a lot of reason to believe that this is going to be very helpful for people running against Republican incumbents. Because
the support of Trump or the opposition too.
Susan Collins is going to be in a very difficult position. Jody Ernst is going to be in a very difficult position. That's why she came out and said that there should be full disclosure by the White House, because she's nervous, and she has reason to be nervous. And I think so. That's the argument for its political efficacy. And the idea that the country could get more polarized is absurd, Tim. The country is extremely polarized. It is not coming together, and that's just the way it is. It's not happening.
So, did you see the NRCC polls they released, a week or so ago?
The NRCC,
the
National
Republican Campaign Committee.
Have I seen the Republican polls? No, I have not.
So they're alleging quite the opposite, that in their target districts and battleground districts, 2/3 of people believe the Democrats are, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but obsessed with Trump and impeachment, and not focusing on core issues.
You're telling me that you're unskewing Fox News polls, but you're telling me that we should have a conversation based upon the internal polling of the Republican apparatus to get themselves reelected?
Yes, because the Fox News poll was specifically called out in the New York Times and Fox News.
That the RCP average was 52%.
I know, and I agreed. It was a good source.
You know what?
So I'm not asking you about the NRCC because I'm saying they're true. I'm asking you about it to get your opinion on what you think about their polling.
I think that I would not go by what the DCCC says is going to happen in these districts, or the Republicans. I wouldn't go by either one of those.
Okay.
I think that their job is to put the best spin on this possible.
So what can we really go on that Americans are willing to campaign more so on impeachment? So actually, let me rephrase this in a better way.
What do you mean by that, campaign more so on impeachment?
So NRCC's claim was that
the Republican Party is claiming that
in these target districts, independent voters prefer talking about core issues like the economy, immigration, and healthcare, but that 2/3 feel the Democrats are too focused on impeachment and Donald Trump himself. You can say that's bunk and irrelevant. Okay, totally fine. I'm asking, what can we go on to figure out what they will be voting for specifically? And I bring this up, the question I guess is,
you and I can, I've already told you, we know that negative and partisanship drove out turnout in 2018 when Donald Trump was even on the ballot, and that Republicans got clobbered in a record-breaking off-year election, and unprecedented.
So we're expecting massive turnout for 2020.
Exactly.
Which, according to Moody's, if it's historical, Trump loses by a few electoral votes. So here's what I'm saying, right? We have Trump raising $15 million in a day, specifically off of impeachment, campaigning on it. He's I guess they're calling it, I forgot what they're calling it, but it's been reported by numerous outlets that Trump has seen a boon among his base, similar to the Kavanaugh effect. In 2018, moderates did really well.
You mean the thing that happened a month before the Democrats had an unprecedented victory against the Republicans?
So specifically, the Kavanaugh effect refers to state level and how that'll affect the presidency, not suburban districts.
No, but when you say the Kavanaugh effect, you're talking about the Kavanaugh hearings, which took place.
The senators who lost and the gains made in the Senate for Republicans, yes.
Those are all red states.
The Kavanaugh effect isn't referring to the losses, right? So the Kavanaugh effect isn't referring to Congress. It was specifically that at the state level, which more accurately reflects presidential elections, the Kavanaugh effect resulted in...
What do you mean by the state level?
Senators versus Congress districts.
Those were all red states.
Where the Democrat, the red state Democrats got kicked out for not supporting Kavanaugh.
Those were all states that Donald Trump won in. They're deeply red states.
Right. So then I guess the argument is that it was inevitable Trump was going to win those states over in 2018.
Was it inevitable that those senators were going to lose? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then, so why would we assume that anything's going to change if the track is staying, solid except for the scandals?
I think red states. I think it's going to be. Yeah, I think he's going to win red states, but in purple states. And
did you see the Moody's analytics?
And anywhere where there is an R5 district or less, I think that that person's going to be in deep trouble. You're talking about states where the partisan index is something like in double digits.
Did you see Moody's recent analytics release on the projections for 2020?
No.
They're saying with an average voter turnout, Trump handedly wins. With low voter turnout, Trump sweeps nearly 400 electoral votes. And only with a historical high will the Democrats secure 279 votes. So Moody's is saying Trump is going to cruise through.
And if that's the case, if Moody's is right, then the key is you need to motivate the Democratic base. Now, when the Democrats opened up this session of Congress, they passed 60 pieces of legislation that were a wish list for Democratic voters. We barely heard about this.
Absolutely.
They want Democrats. We barely heard about it. The news report barely reported on it. Mitch McConnell, of course, wouldn't allow a single one of those to take a vote. I think there's something like 200 bills that he's preventing from having a vote.
Yep.
And so, if we take the thing that you've presented from Moody's as gospel, which is that we need to have an unprecedented turnout by Democrats to win, then it only makes sense that you should deliver for the Democrats who want to come out. And they are all saying, and in massive numbers, impeach Donald Trump. So I think you've strengthened my argument, at least in terms of the politics. Now,
but not moderates.
What moderates?
Moderate voters that make up 60+% of the country. Or is it 40? Sorry, 45%.
I don't know what you're looking at, but the fact of the matter is that the research, I just interviewed a woman named Rebecca Bitkofer. She was the only person to predict the Democratic wave in 2018. She got it down to almost the exact number of seats they were going to pick up 4 to 5 months out. And she says that paradigm that you're talking about, where there is somehow these swing voters, presumably that's what you mean by moderate.
Pew Research, 38% are independent.
Well, that's right. She says those independents either lean Democrat or lean Republican. And the question isn't whether or not they're going to be persuaded to switch the way that they lean. The question is, are they going to come out and vote? And she says the same thing that motivates people who are solidly Democrat motivates those who lean Democrat. Same with the Republicans. The same things that motivate definite Republicans also motivate lean Republicans. And so the idea is that these, what you call independents or moderates, I think moderate is probably a misnomer, but these independents, these less likely people to vote, although we know if they vote, we can predict how they'll vote. The question is, will they come out? And negative partisanship drives those people. And that's why that also reinforces my theory that impeachment is going to help. Because we know that these, if you look at, the independents, go back to that Real Clear Politics poll, you will see that at least over the past 2 or 3 weeks, the appetite for impeachment has gone up by over 20% with those folks too. And so this is what's going to drive people out to vote. I mean, I guess maybe you have an alternate theory to this, but I don't know what it would be. All the metrics that you have set up would be consistent with this.
There are some other polls I could cite, but for the interest of where we're at with polling being like, I'll put it this way. You're citing your expert, I'm citing mine, and in the end, we both think we have a better vision.
You should cite with those polls, because I'm curious.
Harris X poll says they feel independence.
You just told me you want aggregate.
That's why I just said I'm not going to cite the poll for the sake of where we're at in the conversation, and I'll talk about something else.
All right, I'm just saying.
But I can't.
You would be refuting what you said 5 minutes ago, which was that individual polls are irrelevant, and that it's really about the aggregate.
Let's try to be not that strong. The specific issue I had with the Fox News poll was that it was highlighted specifically in a political partisan dispute over its methodology.
Well,
and that I would prefer to look at an aggregate when it comes to impeachment.
Right, and
when it comes to,
we were able to do that, and it bared out what I was saying.
You're absolutely correct. My concern was the partisan nature of the argument. Right? Are we going to get to something substantive where a Republican's going to say, I can't argue with that. And well, the aggregate's there.
No.
You can't argue with it, right?
No, I mean,
that's what I'm talking about.
Look, we know the Republican Party is not going to buck Donald Trump. We know this. They're not going to. Their voters love Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is right. I think he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they would vote for him. And I think that's the nature of our politics. It is hopelessly polarized. And so the question is, how do you react to that?
So I'll tell you why I voted for Obama. I didn't vote for him the second time because of the war issue, and I was put off. I voted for nobody. But I'm not going to vote for Democrat in 2020 for sure. I'm definitely not voting for any Republicans. That's further out of the question. But the main concern for me is the far left push from the Democrats has put me in an awkward position where even my family has rejected Democrats at this point. So my family's Southside Chicago. We owned a business in Boys Town.
What do you mean by far left? I mean, I'm sure.
Give health care to non-citizens, for example, right? That's like that was the big one they did on the debate stage.
You're giving health care to non-citizens.
Right.
Okay.
They all raised their hand saying they were going to do it. So I'll give you an example. My mom is on government benefits, and that's terrifying to her when she sees them saying, our budgets are running thin, we're cutting, and we're also going to start giving a portion of what you get to non-citizens. People like my mom, who are historical Democrats in Chicago, gasp and call me panicking, saying, what's happening? Am I going to lose my health care? And I don't know.
Well, then you should tell her to hope for Bernie.
Don't vote for a Democrat because they're all pledging to give it away.
No, Bernie Sanders will make sure that your mom has health care free at the point of service. That Bernie Sanders is I mean, I'm not sure what kind of assistance she's on, but
it's nothing serious, right? She's just
quite committed to expanding that type of service. I mean,
But how can you afford it if Bernie Sanders is also pledging to give it to non-citizens and we had 1 million come in this year alone?
How much do you think that's going to cost?
So right now, universal healthcare's bill is what, 30 trillion? Am I wrong?
30 trillion over 10 years.
So 3 trillion a year.
That's correct. And do you know how
we added 1 million non-citizens this year so far?
And do you know how much we spend on healthcare as it is now over the 10 years? If we have the system that we have now, it's $32 trillion.
So the concern I'm saying is not that we can't afford it, but we can't afford it if we're having an influx of non-citizens who didn't pay into it the year before.
Where do you think, well, first off, why would you think non-citizens would not be paying into it? How do you think they get into the system?
Well, one of the arguments that I've heard is that they use false Social Security numbers and IDs specifically because they're concerned about deportation.
And
but
what do they do?
They can receive benefits with those numbers.
Well, but they also pay into it with those numbers.
No, they're concerned about going to an employer with information that could result in their deportation.
I understand, but that money goes into the system. If I go give my employer, if one of the people who works for me, for instance, gives me a fake Social Security number, I'm still going to pay those Social Security taxes. He's still got to pay those Social Security taxes.
So let's say right now, right? So I'll try and give you an analogy to break down what I mean. Let's say right now you have $100 in your bank account, and every month you spend $100 on healthcare and put $100 back in between you and your friends who pull it together. One day someone comes into the country or comes into your house without having paid anything into your bank account, and then requires money from that account. There will be a deficit. You see what I mean?
How do they require money from that account? Like
if somebody, so California recently passed a law that people under 26 who are non-citizens have access to government-funded healthcare. That means you can come literally across the border right now, go to a hospital, get the program you need, and then leave.
What do you think happens if someone is in an emergency room situation and goes into the emergency room? Do you think they?
Yeah, that's so Trump's trying to end that. You're right. Yeah.
Okay, but that's existing now.
It's for
so it's an existing cost that exists now, and I'm telling you that Medicare for all, including the free health care for non-citizens, will be cheaper. This is according to the Mercatus study, which is a right-leaning think tank. Will be $2 trillion cheaper over the course of those.
Will it be cheaper for me personally? I pay nothing right now. I don't have to go to the hospital.
Will it be cheaper for you personally?
Yeah, I don't have to pay anything because I don't have to go to the hospital. I'm young and healthy.
Okay, well, you're not going to be young and healthy in the future. So well, give me a time horizon. Will it be cheaper for you in the next 10 minutes, or will it be cheaper for you over the course of your lifetime?
I'm 33. I imagine when I'm 40, I'll start needing, a couple checkups, but maybe around the time I'm 50, I'll need more dedicated healthcare. So 20 years, my costs are going to go up for the next couple decades.
Right. And then
So I'll
drop
tell you. Listen,
precipitously.
it's not like I got to admit I'm actually in favor of government funded health programs, but I lean more towards a public option for the sake of competition and for a weaning towards a universal system as opposed to an outright universal system. My concern is the
I'm
non-citizens
not sure I
argument.
understand. Well, I understand you don't like
Right.
non-citizens getting health care because you think it's going to cost you more money, but you can't
not just that,
really give me a number. You just think it's in principle wrong.
Well, not necessarily. No, I think if somebody came into this country and they were dying, we have to help them. We have an obligation morally. I think the issue is creating a structure, an institutionalization that says you can come here. I mean, you had Castro saying decriminalize the border crossings, and then they offered up programs, and then you have Ocasio-Cortez recently announcing full access to federal benefits for all non-citizens, regardless of immigration status.
Yes.
To me, that is so far past the line in terms of what is left in this country. You are advocating for people to come in here without penalty and then get access to things that I'm paying for, right?
Well, and that they're paying for it too. I mean, they pay into Social Security.
Eventually they'll pay for it. We're hoping.
No. Tim, just do a little research on this, and you will find that immigrants, undocumented immigrants, pay into Social Security. The only difference is now they don't get it. They don't get it back. They don't collect.
So eventually, right? So it's an inflationary system where we have to hope that we keep having more people coming in to pay for those who came in last time, right? Or who are coming in now. I'm sorry.
No, they don't. Like as it stands now, they pay into the system and they don't collect on Social Security.
So if we create a system that says you can cross the border without penalty, without criminal penalty,
right?
You have access to federal benefits. Do you not think there will be people who come into this country and get benefits and don't pay in?
Do I think there will be people who get benefits and don't pay in? I think there'll be some children.
And what about people who come in and almost immediately get benefits or become a taxpayer burden without having a chance to have paid into anything because we've decriminalized border crossings?
I think that it's possible there will be some small numbers of people doing that. Yes.
Can we create a system where we incentivize by saying, so for example, you have people coming from the Congo, and I don't understand how this is an argument the left has made. There's literally, it's been documented across the board, Congo to Angola to Brazil, up through Central America and to the U.S. border demanding refugee status. That's not a refugee, I'm sorry. That was thousands of dollars for a family to travel in all of that, and Brazil is beautiful and safe. So how does this argument stand that we should open the door to people who are coming from Africa through all of these different countries where they were already safe? So the challenge, the problem I then see is
Tim, I don't have a problem with immigrants coming into this country if someone goes through the refugee process, which is incredibly stringent and laborious, and they are adjudicated as deserving of refugee status. I think they should have the refugee status.
Even if they've bypassed safe countries, they've spent thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So don't you think that's taking advantage of us?
Taking advantage of us? What do you mean?
Right. So if you pay $6,000 to bring your family through 17 different countries to come to the United States,
right?
That's not a refugee. I'm sorry. I get it. You can go through the adjudication process.
I don't know if it's a refugee either. It's adjudicated, and if if they're found to be refugees, that they have maybe more opportunity here because maybe they have family or whatnot. Then I have no problem with that. I mean, but I don't even have a problem with it. Frankly, for the most part, I would take in almost as many immigrants as we could.
You don't think that there's an infrastructure capacity? I'll give you an example. New York, for instance.
I would not only take them in. I would have a much easier process for legalization.
So we'll use New York as an example. Their metro system is collapsing, right? They can't afford to fix it, and it's overcrowded. Can we afford to bring more people into that metro system?
Yes.
But it's already on the verge of collapse.
As a federal government, we should spend more on infrastructure.
I agree with that. But, I mean, at what point, you scale that up, at what point do you reach critical mass?
I think you spend what you need to spend to maintain the system.
So we have a massive deficit right now, right?
Correct.
We can afford to spend more money as it is?
That's right.
How does that make sense?
Well, deficit spending is the way that governments work. We print our own
Let's,
money.
but
Most of the money that we owe to ourselves.
That's true, and I'll say this: I think where we're at so far is kind of just we have opinions, and I don't think you're wrong. I just think, we look at different things, and in the end, whatever, we'll figure it out.
Yes,
but
you are very concerned about immigrants coming in and taking advantage of you.
I'm not concerned about immigrants at all. I'm actually I'm very much pro all immigrants. Period. My concern is undocumented. We can't when we can't control for the shape of our economy, and then we have budget shortfalls and overspending. Budget shortfalls, overspending, and mismanagement.
On a state level, they don't have the ability to print their own money. That's a problem. But
I'll give you a better example. If we have an influx of 1 million people like we did this year, if they go to areas that we can't account for because it's undocumented, we don't know who's going where, then we're not going to appropriate FEMA spending properly. We're not going to appropriate federal budgets.
If you want to join me in saying that we should award citizenship to these folks so that we can have a proper census and make it easier to assess where we have needs, I am down for that totally.
I am personally for path to citizenship for everybody.
Okay.
But we have to get a hold on immigration so we don't create a pipeline of incentives where we put people on risky journeys to try and come here. You see what I mean?
Well, I don't think that it's a question of incentives. I think it's a question of what's going on in those countries. I mean, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, these are incredibly dangerous places now.
Mexico's not. Mexico City is amazing. Like, why not stay there? They were even there was even a video that went viral.
What makes you think that Mexico has more capacity to absorb these folks than we do?
Because Mexico actually planned it out and offered it to them, and they denied it.
We are much wealthier country than Mexico.
I mean, Mexico is particularly wealthy. So hold on. Let's assess that, right?
Much wealthier. I mean, I don't understand.
But you're not arguing. You're arguing something different now. If we're arguing that someone should be safe because the places are dangerous, Mexico offered them safety.
I was arguing that it's not a question they're coming here because of incentives. They're leaving those countries because it's dangerous there, and they may have more opportunity in the United States, frankly, than they would in Mexico.
I mean, have you been to Mexico City?
Sure.
I mean, it's industrialized and beautiful, and could certainly expand and outlying areas to pass through 3 or 4 countries, but also to like I'll use the more extreme example is Angola and Congo. Brazil, for instance, Rio is beautiful, industrialized. Sao Paulo.
I don't have a problem with Angolans or Congolese or anybody. I think that we have the ability to absorb far more immigrants than we are now, and I think it strengthens the country. I think all the evidence shows that it helps our economy, and so.
But what about the other countries?
What about the other countries?
The countries they leave are left, with what they call the brain drain, or with, a loss of critical infrastructure and workers. I mean, it's easy to say we can absorb them because they can do work here, but what about the places where people can't leave and they're stuck? Like, they'll just get worse. Like, so my situation here is, what's the root of the problem and how do we solve it? Just taking people in and be like, hey, we're rich, you can come here.
Tim, we're sort of far afield here. I mean, you were telling me that your parents aren't going to vote for the Democrats because we're taking in, we're giving undocumented immigrants, we're giving them health care.
Well, no.
And now you want me to say, what should we do for the Congo? I mean,
that's just, hold on, full stop. So the issue actually was, I said the far left push. And one example, which we sort of veered off into, was immigration, borders, security, et cetera. We can talk about the far left stuff.
Let's do it.
Go back to that. So one example is the Green New Deal, right? Which is an identitarian, wish list.
A what?
Identitarian wish list.
Well, I'm not sure I understand what that means.
So the beyond the first page, everything was like race-based policies, right? Like, if you're of a certain race, you get access to certain things.
Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Reparations.
Okay.
So, like, did you read the Green New Deal?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because it's not about the environment at all.
It's partially about the environment, but it's about it's the Green New Deal. It's a
So
new
it
deal
was
that also
college,
has,
jobs,
yeah,
healthcare.
yeah.
So it actually barely addressed environmentalism at all,
Well,
and actually
no, no,
included
no, no.
race-based equity.
No. It calls for a
Right.
dramatic
Getting rid of
decrease.
planes,
Not getting rid of planes. It
it
calls
did
for
though.
a dramatic decrease in our carbon emissions. It calls for retrofitting
Every
every
building in the country.
structure in the country for.
Does that sound reasonable?
Does it sound doable or reasonable?
Reasonable to
Yeah.
ask to retrofit every building, switch to high-speed trains, to bring about race-based equity policy, which is, I believe, what it.
I don't know that we'll be able to achieve all of it, but yes, I think it's a great goal to set. Yes, in fact, I think it would create a tremendous amount of jobs, and I think it would create a
So
tremendous prosperity.
let me use a specific example of identitarian policy to tell you why my family particularly does not like the Green New Deal. So the exact example specifically in the Green New Deal references race-based economic equality, which is a reference to giving money to people based on their race. Do you think that I should not be allowed to go to college because of my race? I should be barred from a college because of my race?
Do I think that you should be
Personally,
barred?
yes. So if let's say I have a kid, do you think that my child should be not allowed to, I'm sorry, let me try and make it clear. Should there be a higher standard for me based on my race to enter a university? Higher standard, not an average, a higher standard.
A higher standard.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what your race is, but I think if you're asking me, do I think that we should have, and of course, quotas are no longer allowed, but do I think that we should, higher education institutions should seek to have greater diversity? Yes.
So let me ask you, if based on the current existing policies, not on whether they should or should not be diverse, would you be willing to tell a child they are not allowed to go to a certain school because of the way they look?
Well, I don't think any child, any specific child, you would be able to tell which child is or is not allowed to go to a school. I mean, it's not a question of being
But
allowed.
the policies are in effect right now.
Well, yes. In fact, I also have some bad news for you, that if you come from certain parts of the country, you are weighted, your admission into a college is either weighted positively or negatively. Are you aware of that?
Sure, but I'm talking about how someone looks, nothing else.
How someone looks?
Yeah, just what they look like. Do you think it's fair to tell a kid, you look too much like that kid, therefore we're setting a higher standard for you?
Well, I don't think anybody would ever say that.
That's exactly what they did at Harvard.
That's actually not the case. It was found that was not the case. But
well, no, they won their lawsuit that they are allowed to choose to put a higher SAT standard on Asians.
Yeah,
It's one of the smallest minorities in the country.
They're looking
specifically because immigrants are getting in those schools.
They are looking to create a student body that they want to be diverse.
Great, I appreciate that. So what you're telling me is I have to tell my kids to lie on their application forms and make sure they don't know that you're part Korean. We have to lie about a race. Because when I was little, I was specifically told by my family that if I ever told any institution what my race really was, they would discriminate against me based on my race. So when I see Ocasio-Cortez create race equity policies as a wish list, I immediately recoil in horror. I want to make sure that when I apply somewhere, I don't have to lie. I don't have to tell my kids to lie. But that's the world that's being created by those policies. And that's what scares my family. Especially my dad, who's white, who married into a mixed race family, who's specifically targeted because he's white. And he's passed over for jobs and promotions. And, my dad's a good sport about it. He says, yeah, life, move on. And he did his thing and he had no qualms about it. And then I had to contend with the fact that simply because of the way I look, and I'm mixed, so I have to lie. I have to absolutely lie. I'm better off claiming I'm Hispanic than actually telling people what I really am. It's a nightmare that I don't want to live in. And I'm stuck in it because of these policies.
And let me ask you this. How would you address the the legacy that we've created in this country for the African American community. We know that up
Class.
until, excuse me,
Class-based
class.
policy. Right. So
I mean, there are
economic
people,
programs and
there economic program. Well, like economic programs, like what?
like giving admission based on instead of saying like if you're Asian you got to score 1440, we say if your income is below 30, then you have to score less, or we say we will carve out a section of the school to guarantee low income arrivals.
I mean, I think that's actually, there are folks, Richard Collenberg comes to mind, who is attempting to sort of do that as a way of getting around the bars against sort of, racial quotas. Because when it comes to the distribution of wealth in this country, it matches up quite, sadly, fairly
With
efficient.
race.
If yes, and
Right,
so
right. And that's why I think class addresses everything.
well, I mean, I think I don't have a particular argument against that. I think that's one way to go about it. I mean, it's quite clear, though. I mean, you've already let the cat out of the bag that you think that to a certain extent it will provide for more equity for race, and I think you're going to run up against the same problems that the arguments against the Green New Deal are going to engender anyways. I mean,
Well, so right now
like
at Harvard,
systemically, if you look at like historically black universities, which is part of a program that at least a couple of the Democrats have proposed in providing more funds for those schools, it's because black people have been systemically shut out of the greatest wealth generator, that is house ownership, in this country since this country was founded. And so these colleges don't have the same opportunity to develop endowments. And so you give that money directly to these historically black universities. That's not class-based, but it is.
So here's the problem with race. Harvard, for instance, has an influx of Chinese immigrants and Indian immigrants. That is checked off as Asian, but it completely ignores Laotians and Vietnamese and Filipinos who have to lie and pretend to be something else because of wealthy immigrants.
I'm not going to defend Harvard's policy. I don't really know.
But it's not just Harvard. It's across the board. It's not Harvard is the recent lawsuit. But now you have affirmative action policies targeting race instead of class.
Well,
and that
you've
puts,
always had affirmative action programs that targeted race. But like where are the Democrats calling for, Harvard's admission policy?
I mean, AOC and other members of the squad have actively defended it and retweeted the ACLU, for instance, that openly defended it.
Well, I mean, you don't anticipate.
So they call for it. I mean, and she puts in the Green New Deal specific race-based equity, economic, cap. I forgot what she called it. It was like racial and economic inequality or something. So the problem is, like, how do you tell someone that they're like, you're going to go to Will Smith's kids and be like, you poor kids, you need government benefits. I'm so sorry. That's offensive.
Well,
or do you look at those who are actually in need and say, we're going to do basic income?
I'm not worried about that. Like, like when Hillary Clinton said, I don't want Donald Trump's kids to get free college. I think that would be great. I think it would be great to have billionaire kids go to college with other people. I don't know that they would take them up on it. I don't know that Will Smith's kids would avail themselves of whatever opportunities the Green New Deal provides for them or not. But I'm not too worried about that. I mean, it's frankly, it's a massive bill that is, trying to address climate change and inequity in our society, more broadly speaking, and to develop prosperity. And so, I think, whatever floats your boat. But if that's what your parents are focused on, I would suggest that maybe they need to look at a broader picture.
I think everybody has certain like core issues that their world is based on, right? And so coming from a mixed race family, you can imagine that's a huge deal, especially a poor one that we lost our house in bankruptcy and went through a divorce, and so we had a tough life. And I was homeless several times. And then me trying to claw my way to the top. I get this really special kind of treatment as being part white and part Asian, is that they're both considered like, in a weird space. So there's active discrimination against Asians, and then there's, active discrimination against white people. Of course, now the current trend with intersectional feminism is that white people, you can't be racist towards them. But tell that to the dude who's dying of opioids in the middle of the country because he lost his job 4 years ago, and he'll go vote for Donald Trump. So
Well,
how
but,
we saw.
well, I mean, look, I think the fact of the matter is that when we talk about discrimination, it is really a function, at least if you're going to look at it in terms of racial discrimination, in terms of power dynamics. And there is no doubt that systemically, African American people have been, prevented as a community from developing wealth, and I mean, I think that.
I think it's worse than that. I think they were actively hindered.
Oh yeah.
There's we can look at Ferguson, we can look at the story of the bombing of what they called Black Wall Street. Yeah, of course, man. My family had to flee state to state because of it was miscegenation was illegal. And I certainly didn't go through. It's an interesting conundrum, I'll admit, because I think for my family, it's hard to quantify who has it worse or better based on race. And this is the exact problem I have with race-based policy. Is it fair to say that the smallest minority in the country, mixed race people, have a monolithic experience? It's just not true. However, I also have zero community. There's no community I can turn to. I'm, at Occupy Wall Street, I was actively shunned from every group based on race. They told me white people aren't allowed. And so the white people would then tell me to go to the colored, I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm supposed to do to address these issues if you're basing everything off race and identity, because I don't have a community. So that makes me very sour on all of this push that we see, because Bernie Sanders said white people don't know what it's like to be poor. And that for me was like,
Bernie Sanders said white people don't know what it's like to be poor?
He absolutely did.
In what context?
So on the debate stage in 2016, he said, if you're white, you don't know what it's like to be poor. You don't know what it's like to live in a ghetto. And I don't know the full quote, but it was essentially it. Those are two key points he said.
I'm familiar with it. I'm
he absolutely said
that.
it.
He's, I've never heard Bernie Sanders being accused of not appreciating poverty of all races. Conceivable he misspoke, but that is not, I think, consistent with everything else that we know about Bernie Sanders. But nevertheless, I mean, I think if you think that the left has a problem with race, Tim, you should wait till.
I don't like the Republicans.
Wait till you find out what's happening on the right. And
so, in what capacity though? Because when I go and talk to like a Trump supporter, my race never comes up. I'm never asked about it. When I go and talk to millennial leftist types, they tell me to shut up because I'm white.
I don't know about your interactions with different people, but I don't know if you may not like the personalities of people who vote for leftists, but I'm really talking about policies. And
yeah, I'd rather a meritocratic policy.
Well, but there, the point is that how do you establish what a meritocracy is? I mean, because when you have certain segments of the population who have had much greater opportunities to develop what we assess as merit, right? I mean, how do you measure that? I mean, I can tell you that I can tell you that any educator you talk to, when they're assessing the qualities of schools, the first thing they'll ask is, what is the median income in that area code? And I will tell you the quality of the schools there. And that is, so we know that there's a huge deficit for people living in poverty for their kids who go to kindergarten in terms of like a listening vocabulary deficit. I mean, we know that you're living in a poor area, and particularly a minority area where minorities have had less political power, that your chances of growing up with air pollution are greater, and that has a direct effect on your neural pathways and your brain development, and can impact your behavior new study out showing, expanding on the work that people have done in terms of lead and what it's done
Oh yeah.
to certain areas. So, I don't know how you establish merit in the context of a society which has, handicapped specific communities within that society. How do you then assess a merit? How is that fair? How is that
Well,
possible?
no. You. So when I say meritocratic, I'm not throwing out any kind of government program at all. I'm saying we need class-based. I don't know. I guess I don't know. Programs. I guess I don't know what to call it. But if somebody is in an area, I don't care what their race is. I don't care what their gender is. I don't care what their identity is. I care about the obstacles in front of them.
Well, why do you think these things are mutually exclusive? I mean, if you look
because you have policies specifically saying like voter ID is racist, right? While ignoring the fact that
voter ID is racist.
But why is it racist to ignore the fact that poor white people are in the same economic circumstance as a poor black person? How is that racist?
For voter ID?
Are you saying a poor white person is more likely to get an ID?
A poor white person is more likely to get an ID.
So you're saying black people? Why don't black people get IDs then?
Well, to a large extent, it has to do with the way that the systems are configured. I mean, you can go and look in the trials that found the voter ID to be race-based. That the numbers of African Americans who will be disenfranchised when you introduce a voter ID. I mean, these are all the data and academic work has been done for you here, Tim. It's
right.
And
I think you're talking about voter blocks as opposed to individuals.
I'm talking about the number of people when you institute a voter ID in a state like Pennsylvania, let's say, or Wisconsin, the number of people who are disenfranchised, who don't have access, as found as evidence in the context of these cases, African Americans are disproportionately affected for a whole range of
reasons. I mean, we can get into the voter ID thing, but my point was like,
well,
I hear what you're saying, but the argument to me is if you're going to tell two people, like,
nobody's telling two people anything.
No, right. So here's the problem. If you're going to tell me voter ID is racist, what you're saying, I think, bears little. Like, the solution is simple. We set up we set up ID programs in those areas you're talking about.
That's one way of doing it.
So then to ignore the fact, I didn't mean to specifically get into a voter ID thing.
Doing in Wisconsin, they're going around and actually trying to get people IDs in that system, but it's far more challenging because there's a lot less, DMVs in these areas.
Right. I didn't mean to ignite the voter ID thing because I understand what you're saying. But the point I was making is that often when it comes to macro level politics, they assign a racial component to it, ignoring the plight of those who may be in the minority. So I understand that black people may be the most disenfranchised, but why do we never talk about the fact that poor Asians and poor Hispanics and poor white people are affected as families the exact same way?
Well,
I understand the voting block issue.
I think if you find in these cases that it is an issue, but the fact of the matter is that when you're talking about the legality of it, there is no laws in this country about disenfranchising people because they're poor. I mean, you can't have a poll tax, and certainly when that comes up, it becomes an issue. But this all goes back to Reconstruction, and frankly, a desire even after the Civil War to inhibit the ability of black people to vote. And if you look and see what happened with the Supreme Court in the wake of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and by the 1890s, the Supreme Court was saying that it was okay for states to institute things like literacy tests and poll taxes. And
I don't think you want to hear about St. Louis.
These southern states in particular were perfectly fine to disenfranchise poor white people as well as black people.
Right. But I completely agree.
That was a bank shot. They were willing to lose poor whites' votes if they could make sure that they didn't allow black people to vote.
Absolutely. So that's why I think.
We have laws in this country about racial discrimination. We don't have laws in this country about discriminating against people who are poor, but for in very narrow circumstances. And so when a and obviously you're aware that we have a long history of disenfranchising Black people in this country, and minorities. And when we're aware of a policy that has been put in place that has de facto, disparate outcomes for different races, that's why you hear that, because that is actually something that can help strike down that law.
But it won't actually solve the problem; it'll exacerbate it.
I don't know what that means.
So, if it seems like the obvious solution is, hey, we've got a problem that primarily affects one race. Let's institute a racial policy targeting this group. Like, you're now codifying racial law.
You just told me that you had a problem with that.
Exactly, I do. Right? Yes, absolutely. So, but it is nuanced. I'm going to stress, right? It's not black or white. It's an issue of some identitarian policy makes sense. Some, like, government identity makes sense, like civil rights, and a lot doesn't. So if we have poor people across the board and we can solve the problem of all poor people, and it would primarily benefit those who have been historically disenfranchised,
why
we
do
can
you
avoid.
Think these things are mutually exclusive?
Because if you tell, let's say you take a Vietnamese kid who's 12 years old and he's partially, bouncing between foster families, you can look him in the eye and tell him you're not allowed to go to Harvard because they just won a lawsuit saying they can exclude you based on your race.
Aware that Harvard's policy is not a governmental policy.
I'm making an example of the institutionalization of race-based policy.
I'm asking you.
I'll give you a better example. Tell the 12-year-old kid whose mother's crack addicted and he's white, he's not allowed to be a police captain because he's going to be shot down based on his race. That literally happens. It happens all the time. Tell that white kid who grew up in the gutter with a crack-addicted mom, you are not allowed to make it up the ranks of this country, of this particular institution in government, because we have instituted a policy that puts a higher standard on you because you look like them.
Look, I can tell you that I know, having been in show business and, and having been, and also in the sort of, to the extent that I'm in, the news business as it is, I am completely aware of the fact that there are times where my voice is less relevant in a conversation because I'm a, upper middle class white guy.
Upper middle class being the important part.
No.
So let me read you this quote. Quote: "When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be living in a ghetto. You don't know what it's like to be poor. You don't know what it's like to be hassled when you walk down the street or you get dragged out of a car." That's what Bernie Sanders said on the debate in 2016.
Yeah, I think he probably misspoke about being poor, but I think those other things, I think to a large extent, I think are the case. I mean, we had that was when stop and frisk was still very prominent, and the experience of black kids living in the city is radically different from white kids.
Did you grow up
of your wealth?
Did you grow up in a middle class family?
Yeah.
I think that's where your perspective on who is deserving of help or isn't comes from. Because I grew up in a lower class family and I was homeless several times. And
I got to sit
in the gutter with people of all races, and I got to get beaten by the cops and dragged out of my car, and had cops plant drugs on me and infringe my rights all across the board. And so I learned that the one thing we had in common is that when you're poor, you're trash, no matter what race you are. And so I'm
not refuting that, but I mean, look, we can look at statistics as to how many black kids in the city were subjected to stop and frisk as opposed to white kids.
And you're talking about poor neighborhoods where the New York City police would go into poor areas and, because of historical disenfranchisement, target those who had no power to fight back.
That's correct.
But I'll tell you what, they weren't going to the Upper West Side and going to those executives who are black and raiding their homes and arresting them for stop and frisk. They don't go to the Upper West Side. They go to the poor areas where no one can fight back. So listen, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, right across the street from a white trash suburb, and we got it all day and night from the cops kicking our door in, pointing guns at us, planting drugs on us, because we couldn't do anything about it. So when you see the number, you're right. So you're looking at the surface. I see the race. Now realize it's because, yes, historical disenfranchisement, but it affects people based on class. Because I'll tell you what, man, when you're rich, it doesn't matter what your race is. To an extent, it does. I get it, right? For sure, people are racist. That's Dude,
I think there's a lot of black people who would tell you otherwise.
no, like I agree. People are racist, and you'll deal with some.
I mean, I can
But
tell you, like,
damn,
for
I
instance,
just swore
here's a
again.
story that I told.
Can't swear.
I've got to go shortly, but
Right on, man. I appreciate it though.
I will tell you that when I first started in my acting career, I was on a show that was it was mostly an all-black show, and I played a white character on the show, and I went with a buddy of mine from the show. We were at his apartment in Hollywood, and we pulled into the underground garage. There's a lot of those out there. And as soon as we pulled in, his buddy pulled in behind us, driving a Range Rover. That was the car du jour at the time. And he's like, "Oh, thank God you were here," because I had to pull in because I was getting followed by the cops again. He had been pulled over by the cops in the 2 months prior 7 times. He had called the police department to see if he could get a sticker saying that he owned the car because he kept getting pulled over so much. And the cop said, "Are you black?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Nothing I can do." Now, I never had that experience. And he, I think, based upon his car versus mine, was doing better than me economically. Mm. And I mean, I think that is I think is an example of, it's not to diminish at all the experience that you had. And I mean, I think,
right.
And it doesn't.
And racism
diminish.
is a serious issue in this country,
right?
Especially. Like, I agree with your assessment. I think that is a big problem.
An example of where you can be subjected to racism, and not have it be a function of your class.
I agree completely.
And so, I mean, we have perfect examples in the Northwest Territory. In the mid 1800s, we had 10,000 very successful black free farmers, and these states all passed laws. They're successful now, right? I mean, they're doing well and passed laws that were specifically targeted to discriminate against them. We've seen that with different groups, throughout the history of the United States. None that were necessarily as durable as African Americans. So I don't think there's a mutual exclusiveness to this. I think for the, I find me a politician outside of AOC who is more, and maybe a few others, who is more concerned about not just race, but also poverty issues and economic justice and environmental justice. And I will doff my cap to you, but I don't think you're going to find them. Now, no politician is perfect, but the fact of the matter is we have 2 parties in this country, and you can say I'm not going to choose either, but all you're doing is you're basically just sitting on the sidelines. You're not participating in the democracy. The hardest choice in the world is to choose between the lesser of 2 evils.
Well, I'm voting.
And the fact is that you can vote for somebody who has no chance of winning, but it's more or less the exact same act. You're just you might as well go out and paint the mural.
I'm supporting Tulsi and, to a lesser extent, Andrew Yang, and so either one of them will get my vote.
And I think, but I'm talking about in the general election. I mean, I'm
going to vote for either of them no matter what happens. Well, I might vote for myself. I'm more of a union collective bargaining type mentality, in that we must stand up and strike against whatever, even if we're on the losing side, right?
I agree with the idea of withholding your labor, but the fact is that, Tim, is that voting is not about your labor. It is it is simply a number.
I don't mean that. I mean, like, if you're at work and you had 2 managers and you were getting stiffed on pay, and one said, I'll cut your hours, but I'll give you better healthcare. And the other said, no, I'll give you the healthcare, but you got to work, extra hours. Or you could strike and say, no, give me what I want, right? Yeah. I'm not going to choose.
Withholding your labor against the capitalist class is a far different dynamic than wasting your vote. It just simply is.
Well, so hold on. Like, which Democrat would I vote for? You know what I mean?
The one who is the nominee.
Absolutely not. Biden? No way.
Let
me think. Kamala Harris? No way. She locked up innocent people, man. That's nuts. Tulsi Gabbard, a major in the National Guard with real military experience, who was anti-war.
I'm not telling you who to vote for in the primary, but the fact of the matter is that if Kamala Harris does not win the nomination, she, writing her in is useless act.
Would you vote for Kamala Harris if she got the nomination?
I would vote against Donald Trump.
But Kamala Harris locked up innocent people.
I am aware of that.
Oh,
so did
dude.
Donald Trump.
I mean,
So
you know
did
what, man?
Donald Trump. He has literally kidnapped children who will never be reunited with their parents. They are in foster homes and they will never be reunited.
I mean, there's an entirely more complicated issue. What's going on with the border.
What I just told you is perfectly clear, and it's perfectly.
I gotta say, Kamala Harris
reality.
willfully locking up innocent people and extending their prison sentences is very different from people entering the country illegally and whether or not Trump's enforcement crossed the line.
Taking children.
Okay, look.
Separating them from their parents, they will never see them again. The parents will never see the children.
Did Kamala Harris separate the people she locked up from their kids too? She did. Great, she's worse.
Permanently? No.
Well, yeah, she locked people up that were innocent and held them beyond their terms for cheap labor, separating them from their families. I would never vote for that. That's dangerously scary. Like, for all the bad things Trump has done, we can compare and try and quantify what's bad. I'm not going to vote for either of it.
I understand, and you will feel like you have a clean conscience, but you will also be deluding yourself because you will have no impact on the future. And really, frankly, I think that it's
tell the unions that
it is. No, you're conflating.
No. I'm talking about standing up and being that tree, regardless of the majority.
Withholding labor from capitalists is different.
That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is when you're facing defeat, don't give in to immorality simply because it's slightly less immoral. That doesn't make sense. How do you quantify evil or immorality? Amorality?
Someone once called my show with this question. Then I got to go because I'm supposed to go.
Yeah, sorry. I appreciate you being on for as long as you did, though. But we did go a bit longer than I should have.
They said to me, would you be in favor of more concentration camps or less concentration camps? So if you knew that you were voting for someone who was going to create, and they asked me this because I'm a Jew.
You're talking about Obama?
No, they're asking, they were, this is a hypothetical that a caller asked me because I was Jewish. And they would say to me, they said to me, would you vote in favor of someone that you could be sure was going to create 10 concentration camps? Or would you vote for someone who would create 5 concentration camps? Or would you not vote? And
not vote.
I would vote for someone who is going to create less concentration camps.
So you're willing to put your weight behind somebody who's going to make concentration camps?
No, I'm not willing to put. I'm willing to put my weight behind diminishing the number of concentration camps.
I think that before you go, that's a really great point that I think may separate. It's utilitarianism versus deontologism. That you're quantifying versus I'm not. You see what I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying your philosophical standard is the minimization of harm, and mine is more about the individual is the small. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I'm curious about the second part of that. You said, you know what I mean, because I really don't.
Oh, so minimization of harm. The two philosophies
about feeling
violating the ethics of an individual is violating ethics regardless, and yours is minimization of harm is better. So utilitarian versus deontological. From my standpoint, committing one unethical act is a violation of principle and ethics that can't be crossed. But I will admit, there's not like a hard line. It's
I think that is silly, to be honest with you.
I mean, I respect you, but they're very strong philosophical positions held by most people.
I believe that less suffering is better, and that I am willing to.
I will tell you something you won't like to hear, though.
I'm willing to sully myself if that's the outcome.
But I'll tell you something you're not going to want to hear, and I admit it's I'll call it dickish. Utilitarianism is typically the villain in most movies.
I don't care.
Yeah. So for instance, like Thanos was utilitarian, and Captain America was deontological.
I didn't.
So Thanos willing to reduce the suffering by killing hundreds of trillions versus the thousands of trillions, which would be living better off. So comic book movies.
I'm not having to kill anybody. I'm just voting and choosing.
I mean, if you vote in favor of somebody who's going to build a concentration camp, you are.
No, one of these people is going to win, One of these two outcomes are
Stand in the resistance.
I can do that after I try and minimize what I'm going to be having to resist.
The concentration camp only gets built if enough people like you believe they should support this person in fear.
I got news for you. If
yeah.
95% of the people don't vote, it's still going to get built.
That's actually not true. We have rules for that.
The big argument that I heard from folks who were saying that they wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump was, we're going to teach the Democrats a lesson. And they're going to
that was a decent amount. That was the 12 to 18%.
They cannot take our vote for granted. And
those are the Bernie or bust people, though.
Do you think that lesson was learned?
No way.
Right, of course not. And you know what? I said that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
But they voted for Trump. You see the point? Like,
by not voting, they voted for Trump. Yes.
For me, it's simple. If it's not one or the other. You're not either a utilitarian or a deontologist.
Those are your philosophical things. I'm telling you,
they're just standard philosophies. But the point I'm making is
one of two people will win the election. It'll either be Donald Trump.
Only because of that mentality, man.
No, it's because of the system that we have.
It's because you put confidence in that system and I don't. And if you didn't either, man, imagine how many people would vote for somebody else and change things. It's like this. If everyone at a company stood up and walked out, they get what they want.
But you know what, Tim? You and I are not going to convince those people to walk out.
I disagree.
Well,
it's like this. I'll put it this way. The way I see it is an analogy. I understand labor is different, but I'm imagining being in a workplace and having someone say, you'll never convince the rest of the employees of this company to stand up and strike. So why do it? Just take the small raise.
The analogies that you are making are not the same. They're not doing the work that you want to do. The fact of the matter is, I'm going to jump off a building. Do I jump off a 20-story building or a 5-story building? You have
20.
no choice. Okay.
You're going to die either way. Make it quick, right?
And vote for Trump.
No, but people did. That was literally what people thought.
I've got to push somebody off a 20-story building or a 5-story building. Because it's not me who's going to suffer. It may not be you if there's no difference between Joe Biden, who I loathe beyond my ability.
Yeah, he should not be in the race.
And Donald Trump. It's not going to be me or you who are going to suffer. It's going to be other people, people who are far more vulnerable than we are. Maybe your mom might suffer.
I'm not gonna ever vote for anybody in support of a concentration camp or any other very dangerous policy.
You're not going to vote
protest
to
against
minimize the number of concentration camps is really what you're saying.
I'm going to vote for the person who says no concentration camps.
But there isn't a person who says that.
I think Tulsi Gabbard is. And to a lesser extent, Andrew Yang. I think Tulsi's fantastic. Not perfect, but she's one of the best I've seen in a long time. I'm hoping.
You're missing the analogy. I mean, you're pretending that there's a third option, and there isn't, Tim. This is not the way our system works. But listen, I gotta go. That's my job. I'm sorry.
Right on, man. Hey, thanks. Let's try and do it again. I think we might have gone too long, so I'll try and figure something out. But seriously, man, I really do appreciate having a conversation with you.
Hold on 1 second.
All right, man.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care, dude.